In September of the year 9 AD, 3 Roman legions marched into a forest in northwestern Germany. 20,000 men, the finest professional soldiers on earth, veterans of campaigns from Britain to Syria, armed with the most advanced military technology of the ancient world. None of them came out. The Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar, upon receiving the news in Rome, reportedly ran his head against the walls of his palace, tearing his clothes, crying out into the darkness, "Varus, give me back my legions." Those 3 legions, the 17th, the 18th, the 19th, were never replaced. Rome retired their numbers permanently, in shame. The only time in Roman history that happened. And the man who did it was one of their own. His name was Arminius. Born around 18 BC into the Cherusci tribe, a Germanic people who inhabited the forests and plains of what is now Lower Saxony in northwestern Germany, between the Weser and Elbe rivers. As a boy, perhaps around 10 years old, he was taken to Rome. Not captured, taken. There is a difference, and it matters. Rome had a system. When they wanted to pacify a troublesome tribe without destroying it, they took the chief's sons as hostages, educated them in Rome, raised them Roman, then sent them back, fluent in Latin, trained in Roman military tactics, loyal to Roman power, or so Rome assumed. Arminius was educated in Rome. He learnt Latin, he studied Roman military strategy, Roman formation tactics, Roman engineering. He rose to the rank of equestrian, Roman knighthood. He commanded Roman auxiliary cavalry. He was trusted, decorated, respected. Tacitus, the Roman historian, described him as a young man of noble birth, brave in action and alert in mind, possessing an intelligence quite beyond the ordinary barbarian. He showed in his countenance and in his eyes the fire of the mind within. Rome thought it had made him theirs. It had made him dangerous. Around 7 AD, Arminius returned to his people as a Roman liaison officer. To help the Roman governor, Publius Quinctilius Varus, manage the Germanic tribes east of the Rhine. What he found when he returned, we can only imagine. His people under Roman taxation, Roman administrators treating Germanic nobles as subjects, a culture being slowly absorbed into the empire, the way Rome absorbed everything, methodically, efficiently, and without particular regard for what was lost. Something shifted in Arminius. He began meeting with the tribal leaders in secret, the Cherusci, the Bructeri, the Marsi, the Chatti, the Chauci, tribes that had fought each other for generations. He convinced them to fight together against Rome. And he did something extraordinary for a man trained in Roman military doctrine. He didn't plan a battle. He planned a trap. In September of 9 AD, Arminius reported to Varus that a tribal uprising had broken out in the interior of Germania. It required immediate response. He knew a shortcut through the Teutoburg Forest. Varus trusted him completely. He shouldn't have. The route Arminius had selected was not a shortcut, it was a corridor, a narrow passage between dense forest and marsh, stretching for miles, where the Roman column, 12 miles long when fully extended, would be unable to form its battle formations, unable to use its artillery, unable to manoeuvre. Arminius had spent years preparing this ground, hidden earthen walls to funnel the Romans, concealed positions for thousands of warriors in the tree line, multiple attack points along the entire length of the column. The attack began on the 8th of September, in the rain. The rain was important. Roman artillery, the bolt throwers, the catapults, depended on dry bowstrings. Rain made them useless. And the Germanic warriors, lighter and faster than Roman legionaries, knew every tree in this forest. The Romans did not. The battle lasted 3 days. Over approximately 16,000 to 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed. The commanders fell on their own swords rather than face capture, Varus among them. When it was over, Arminius had done something no enemy of Rome had managed since the catastrophe at Cannae 2 centuries earlier. He had destroyed a Roman army. Not defeated it, destroyed it. Augustus Caesar, the most powerful man on earth, ran his head against palace walls and wept for his legions. Now here is where the genetics become extraordinary, because Arminius was a Cheruscan, and the Cherusci were a West Germanic tribe, and West Germanic peoples carried a very specific genetic signature, one that science has now been able to trace across 2,000 years of European history. The principal Proto-Germanic branch of the Indo-European family tree is R1b-S21, also known as U106. This haplogroup is found at high concentrations in the Netherlands and northwest Germany. It is the dominant Y chromosome lineage of the West Germanic tribes, the Cherusci, the Franks, the Saxons, the Frisians. The Urheimat, the original homeland of the Germanic peoples, is located in southern Scandinavia and northern Germany. Around 1700 BC, during the Nordic Bronze Age, a distinct culture began to form in this region. Genetically, they were a fusion of 3 ancient groups: Western hunter-gatherers, the original inhabitants of Europe, early European farmers who brought agriculture from the Middle East, and corded ware culture steppe pastoralists, the most significant component, who brought the Proto-Germanic language and the warrior genetic profile, high R1a and R1b. So Arminius, son of Sigimer, chief of the Cherusci, born in the forests between the Weser and the Elbe, almost certainly carried haplogroup R1b-U106, the signature of the West Germanic warrior aristocracy. A lineage that traces back through the Bronze Age steppe migrations, through the Yamnaya pastoralists of the Pontic grasslands, all the way to the same ancient migration that produced the Celtic, Italic and Germanic branches of the Indo-European world. The same deep ancestry, in other words, as Julius Caesar's people. 2 men, both R1b, one fighting to expand Rome, one fighting to destroy it. Separated by a century and the Rhine River, united by 15,000 years of shared genetic heritage. But now here is the twist that makes the German DNA story extraordinary. Ancient DNA samples from Germanic sites dated to the 300s and 400s AD show 1-1 haplogroup at between 58 and 67% frequency. In modern Germany, 1-1 is just 16%. Family tree DNA. Read that again. The haplogroup that dominated ancient Germanic populations, I1 at nearly 60% in the archaeological record, is present in only 16% of modern Germans. And R1b-U106, the core West Germanic lineage of Arminius's Cherusci, while significant in modern Germany, is distributed very differently from what the Iron Age pattern would predict. Something happened to the genetics of Germany between the fall of Rome and today. Something that reshuffled the entire genetic deck of Central Europe. That something was the migration period. Between roughly 375 and 568 AD, the world came apart. The Huns arrived from the east, a Turkic steppe people of extraordinary military force who drove everything before them. The Goths fled westward into Roman territory. The Vandals crossed the Rhine, marched through Gaul, crossed into Spain, crossed into North Africa, and sacked Rome itself in 455 AD. The Lombards descended into Italy. The Franks moved into Gaul. The Angles and Saxons crossed the North Sea into Britain. The entire population map of Europe was redrawn in under 2 centuries. And each of these migrations brought different genetic profiles into the territories they settled. The haplogroups detected in samples from Germanic tribes during the barbarian migrations show a prevalence of R1b at 55.3% and a consistent percentage of I haplogroup at 26.4%, both I1a and more abundantly I2a2, particularly frequent in the northern Balkans, with a westward gradient in Central and Western Europe. The Slavic expansion from the east brought R1a into territories that had previously been Germanic. The Gothic and Hunnic migrations brought haplogroups from the Pontic steppe and the Balkans. The Frankish expansion mixed Western and Eastern genetic profiles across what is now France and Western Germany. By the time Charlemagne united the Frankish Empire in the 800s, in the territory Arminius had bled to keep Roman free, the genetic population of Germany looked substantially different from the people who had stood in the Teutoburg Forest 8 centuries earlier. And here is the most extraordinary irony of the entire story. The Cherusci, Arminius's own tribe, disappeared from the historical record by 88 AD, less than 80 years after the Teutoburg Forest. The Germanic Chatti tribe conquered the Cherusci in 88 AD, and the Cherusci began to disappear from records as they were absorbed into later Germanic populations, such as the Saxons, Thuringians, Franks, Bavarians, and Alemanni. The tribe that Arminius died to protect was absorbed within a single lifetime of his death. His people were not destroyed by Rome. They were absorbed by other Germanic tribes. The same process of assimilation that he feared Rome would impose on his people underwent anyway, from within. The R1b-U106 lineage of Arminius's people flows through those populations and into modern Germans today. But the Cherusci as a distinct people, as the tribe Arminius called home, for which he trained and schemed and fought and eventually died, ceased to exist within living memory of the man who saved them. There is one more story that needs to be told. Arminius had a wife. Her name was Thusnelda. She was the daughter of Segestes, a Cheruscan noble who remained loyal to Rome throughout the conflict, who repeatedly warned Varus that Arminius was planning a betrayal, who was ignored. After Teutoburg Forest, the relationship between Arminius and his father-in-law became one of the most bitter personal conflicts of the entire war. Segestes, pro-Roman, was besieged by his own tribe for his loyalty. In 15 AD, Arminius's Roman adversary Germanicus, nephew of Emperor Tiberius, sent to punish the Germanic tribes, relieved the siege and freed Segestes. And Segestes handed over his own daughter. Thusnelda was pregnant with Arminius's child. She was taken to Rome. She walked in chains in Germanicus's triumph, the Roman victory parade, in 17 AD. She gave birth to a son in captivity. The boy was named Thumelicus. He was raised in Ravenna. What happened to Thumelicus after that, history does not record. Arminius never saw his son. In 21 AD, 12 years after Teutoburg Forest, Arminius was assassinated by members of his own tribe. The Cherusci, exhausted by constant warfare, had turned against him. His own relatives killed him. He was 37 or 38 years old. Tacitus, the Roman historian who had described him as the fire of the mind within, wrote his epitaph, and it remains one of the most remarkable things ever written by an enemy about their enemy. Arminius, without doubt the liberator of Germany, who had defied Rome not in her early rise, as with kings and peoples before him, but in the height of her power. A Roman, writing that a Germanic chieftain was the liberator of Germany, at a time when the concept of Germany did not exist. Tacitus saw something that his own empire could not afford to admit. that what had happened in the Teutoburg Forest was not a military disaster. It was a turning point in history, the moment when Rome's expansion into northern Europe stopped. The Rhine became the permanent frontier. East of the Rhine, German. West of the Rhine, eventually French. The linguistic and cultural boundary of Western Europe was drawn in blood in those 3 days in September 9 AD. And it has never moved. So what does modern German DNA actually look like? And what does it tell us about Arminius's people? Modern Germans carry a diverse genetic profile, the accumulated result of every migration and conquest that swept through Central Europe over 3,000 years. R1b-U106, the West Germanic lineage of the Cheruscian Franks, at approximately 20 to 25%. The most direct genetic connection to Arminius's world. 1. The ancient Scandinavian and Northern Germanic lineage, at approximately 16%. Once nearly 60% in ancient Germanic populations, dramatically reduced by subsequent migrations. R1a, the Slavic and steppe lineage, at approximately 15% in eastern Germany, reflecting the Slavic settlement of territories east of the Elbe during the early medieval period. And a complex mixture of haplogroups reflecting Roman-era Italic influence, Celtic substrate from pre-Germanic populations, and the accumulated genetic contributions of every people who crossed through the heart of Europe on their way to somewhere else. The man the 19th century German nationalists called Hermann. The man Hitler claimed as an Aryan ancestor. The man whose monument still stands in the Teutoburg Forest today. A massive statue of a Germanic chieftain with a sword raised to the sky. That man's genetic world, R1b-U106, Iron Age Germanic, Cheruscan, makes up perhaps a quarter of the modern German male gene pool at most. Because the irony of Germany's DNA is this. The country that has been called the heart of Europe really is the heart of Europe, genetically. Modern Germans carry traces of nearly every major migration that has ever passed through the continent. Celts, Romans, Germanic tribes, Slavs, Huns, Franks, Vikings, medieval settlers. Germany is not one genetic story. It is all of them, layered on top of each other, in the same forests where Arminius once set his trap. And in Germany itself, the original Germanic tribes were supplemented, replaced in parts, and genetically merged with Slavic settlers from the east, Roman-era populations from the west, and steppe migrants from the north and south. The founding DNA of Europe's most historically consequential nation is everywhere and nowhere at once. Arminius died at 37. His tribe disappeared within a generation. His son was lost to Roman captivity. His wife walked in chains through Rome. But what he did in September of 9 AD echoed for 2,000 years. The legions he destroyed were never replaced. The numbers were retired in shame. Rome never again seriously attempted to conquer the territory east of the Rhine. The Germanic world remained free. That freedom produced the tribes that would eventually break Rome itself. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Franks, all descended from the same Germanic tribal world that Arminius fought to preserve. He is in the language you speak. He is in the forests that still stand in Lower Saxony. He is in the 20% of modern German men who carry R1b-U106, the haplogroup of the West Germanic warrior aristocracy. Subscribe for the next DNA mystery, because the story of who we are always starts in a forest somewhere.